Genre Hustle, your virtual sci-fi fantasy writers group. I'm Anton.
I'm Jane.
I'm Chelsea.
I'm Chris.
And I'm AP.
And today we have a very special guest. We have Maureen McHugh. Thank you for coming on, Maureen.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, Maureen.
And we're going to talk about your story, Under the Hill. But maybe first, do you want to give us like a quick bio, sort of who you are, what you do, what it's all about?
Sure. I'm a science fiction novelist and short story writer. My first novel, China Mountain Jong, was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula and all that sort of thing a long time ago. My last collection, After the Apocalypse, was one of Publishers Weekly's 10 Best Books of the Year. And I teach screenwriting and interactive fiction at University of Southern California.
Awesome.
Well, you're no slouch.
Can't believe you're even here.
I know.
You've heard of Under the Hill? Well, there's also Over the Hill.
Well, for the ignorant people among us, what is interactive fiction?
About half of my students write video games, and the other part of it is what they used to call new media.
Okay.
So basically, we have to deal with the problems of. So when you're writing for video games, writing is character and situation. It's a really simple way to describe plot. As I tell my students, if you think, okay, here's a situation, convenience store robbery. Thor walks in. Well, what Thor does is he strides up to the guy with the gun and he says, "What is wrong with you? Have you no honor?" Peter Parker walks in and the first thing he thinks is, shit, I'm not wearing my Spider-Man costume. How stories are formed is how a character acts in a situation. When you do interactive, often the character's decisions are made by the person playing the game. So suddenly half of your toolbox is gone for controlling story.
And they have multiple options, right? we're not going to do video games today, but there's like all sorts of different ways to go.
Yeah, and constructing a story that's compelling, which, by the way, video games don't necessarily need story. Tetris works fine. But constructing a story that's compelling is hard to do because of that issue.
Right.
So I mentioned today Under the Hill, which is out now, right?
It was out in September and October.
Right. In Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, their 70th anniversary issue. So congratulations on getting in on that.
I know. It is a great issue, just to plug that issue a little bit.
Moorcock.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got a lot of big
Well, we're
names
like
in it.
this. I'm the short one.
So do you mind, can you read just a little bit, just so people know what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Under the Hill. You have been accepted to Berkman, a tiny but prestigious liberal arts college, and awarded some scholarship money. Berkman was your reach school. You never thought you would get in. You resolve that you will do 3 things when you go to college. 1, you will tell people that everyone calls you Cat. They do not. 2, you will lose 15 pounds. 3, you will stop being the person who is all of your friends' mom's favorite. You imagine this slim, mysteriously, deeply fascinating creature. Your roommate is tall and rangy and has a bike and takes up more than her half of the double. She has a matching duck yellow comforter and rug and what turns out to be lacrosse equipment. She says, "Hi, I'm Katie. You're Amelia, right? Sorry I'm all over the place. I'll get this mess straightened out." "No problem," you say. You don't mention anything about being called Cat because it feels stupid. She will never, as it turns out, get all her stuff straightened out. You will, in the next couple of weeks, finally learn the rules of lacrosse.
Wow.
Somehow Katie is the perfect name for
I know. So where did the idea for this story come from?
It's really funny. Because I do VR and AR and interactive new media, I try to keep up to date on social media. And I was on Tumblr, and one of these posts was a cartoon somebody did about what if there really were elves at your college. There would be rules at your college, therefore, about what bands you hired and what you had to do and what was approved. And I started thinking about, what if there were fae at your college? And then I had to write it.
And there it was.
I think of the fae as scary. Mm-hmm. I like
As
this.
you should.
I like the tall, beautiful, scary people.
Yeah.
Healthy respect.
Yes.
We mortals must have for
Yes.
the fae. Yes.
Yeah, the same respect you have for sharks.
Yes. Well put, Chelsea.
So I think one of the things that hits you right away that you listeners probably heard immediately too is that it's written in second person, which is really unusual.
Yeah.
And some people say never do it, right? I don't know.
Well,
if
we
you've
had a
heard
long
people say that.
we actually did a
Yeah,
whole
we did.
episode, a two-part episode
Two-part.
on point of view, and we struggled with second person a little bit. So I'm really interested to find out how that came about.
Yeah, Chris, because you brought Calvino, right?
I brought in a little Calvino, and it was difficult for all of us.
I first learned about it from the work of Lori Moore,
Oh, I
who wrote
love
a
Lori
collection called Self-Help, which she did as her MFA thesis and then published to great acclaim, which is kind of hateful.
You do kind of hate those people.
Yeah, I've never written a story in second person before. But I went through a serious point of view narrative obsessed phase. And second person, there's 3 versions of what it actually is. And I can only remember 2 of them. So,
Stick to those.
yeah.
When you think of the third one, we'll have you back. It's fine.
Yeah, I will. The most common way it's used is actually it's a stand-in for first person, which is what I did here. And we use it all the time in speech. You know how you sit down to write and you're thinking, oh God, what am I going to write about? I know, I'll put it in second and it doesn't solve anything. Notice I'm actually talking about myself even though I'm saying you. The other version is where it is actually second person and the you is the audience implied. But this story for me is the first one. Amelia is a name I use in stories when the character is really, really deeply based on me.
Well, it's funny because the blurb, if I remember right, in the book, there's a little blurb where you say something like, this is an autobiographical story
Yeah,
or
right.
something.
This is true.
This
Yeah.
is a true story. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's clever. Because you're like,
Yeah.
and then you go right into second person. I'm like, oh, that's funny. Like,
Yeah. But I didn't.
By the way, there will be spoilers.
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
right.
we
Yeah.
should mention
Thank
that.
you.
Yes,
Yeah, we didn't
thank
even
you.
know.
We may talk about the end.
job.
Yeah. I tend to spoil. I also tend to say fuck a lot.
There you go.
So I used it. Initially, I used it because I really love Lori Moore's writing. But also, I think it does this weird thing in a story that it also does when we talk. When I say you, when I'm saying, you sit down to write and you just don't know what to write about, I am saying I am like you. And I workshopped this story at a workshop called Rio Hondo. And it's in New Mexico. It's run by Walter John Williams. And it's a bunch of writers who go to Taos, New Mexico in the spring when it's gorgeous and there aren't many people and get to take it off their taxes. But while we are there, we actually critique each other's stories. And Rick Wilbur, who is this guy who is in some ways totally as unlike me as you can possibly be. His father was a professional baseball player, and if you meet me, you know I am sort of the last person you would take for a jock. And he said, oh my God, this is me. And I am pretty sure that he never met an elf. But when he was in college, he found out he was not going to be able, I think injury, to go on to a professional career.
Interesting. Well, I found it really interesting because we were talking about Calvino, on A Winter's Night, a Traveler, and for me, that's a very, in a way, it's a distancing effect when I read his stuff.
Absolutely.
When I read your story, I immediately noticed the second person, and immediately I was like, oh my God, she's using second person, and then I pretty much forgot about it as I read the story, and it almost did the opposite. It made it very intimate in a way. Was that an effect that you were going for, or did it just...
I think of it at, this is going to sound so stupid. I think it distances you in a way initially that allows you to relax and then sneaks you in.
That's a good
agree with
Yeah. And I think what it does is we kind of develop an emotional familiarity with Amelia as the story progresses. And then because college is and like, your kind of your very early 20s is such a time of transition.
Yeah.
There's so much that resonates with the reader. And it just invites you closer and closer, and you start and having the you there invites you to start thinking about like, oh yeah, the first girl that broke my heart, and like the dried out cheeseburgers at the commissary. Yeah,
I miss them so much.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, and the weird eggs.
Yeah, exactly. It invites you to reflect on your own sort of transitional experiences. And I do think having it in a college, because college is that transition moment, and you signal it in the very beginning when Amelia is like, oh, they're going to call me Kat and I'm going to be this person. And that's how we all,
she is.
right?
do,
Like every fall, I feel like in school, I don't know if you all did this, but I was like, this year I'm going to have my binder totally organized. And like, right? So
Lofty goals.
That's such a Jane goal. That is such a Jane goal.
so I really I thought the setting worked really well for that. The other thing that I think the second person direct address kind of did for me was it made me wonder, who is telling this story, if it's you and it's Amelia, but it was almost like she's telling it to herself after some period of time, because it's also in past tense.
That's
Right.
interesting, because I don't think Amelia is telling the story.
I didn't think so either.
AP has a
Interesting.
theory on this. We talked about.
Yeah, this is just my own personal.
It's just
thing.
AP's
I want to hear.
theory.
I want to hear.
So I mean, and we're going to talk about footnotes later because
This
that's
to
a
me
big part of it.
ties to footnotes.
So,
Yes.
Oh, I
so
think
tied
we-
into the footnotes, and maybe this is where we transition to it. To me, after I finished reading the story, I imagined this was whoever the narrator is, and I couldn't quite figure that out, talking to Amelia, but doing it in front of a Fae person who is observing, and the footnotes are for the Fae, and they're watching this interaction to learn more about humans.
I love that.
That
and
is
I am
so interesting.
so
AP.
tempted to say, oh, you're absolutely right.
So because the
interesting theory.
footnotes, one of them is in Fae.
Right.
So obviously whoever's reading the footnotes has to be able to read Fae. And then another one was like, it was telling the person reading something that Amelia already knew. So the footnote wasn't to Amelia. So that's why I was like, I had this like maybe third person that was part of what was going on. But that's just what I read.
No, it's a legitimate question. When I worked starting in 2003 in a particular form of interactive narrative called alternate reality games, we were trying to invent a new art form. And when novels first started in English, I mean, we're not going to talk about Cervantes because he's just himself. Like when Daniel Defoe was writing Robinson Crusoe, his name was not on the book. He pretended that the book was by Robinson Crusoe.
That's right. Yeah.
And because the question that they had to answer, nobody had reading protocols for fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea was, you were telling your life story. Over time, then we went to the omniscient narrator, and now the narrator is the invisible character controlling the story. And we're all comfortable with that. And we don't think, well, who's telling the story? Just like when you're watching Spartacus, you don't think, why are there movie cameras in the bath? Wrong. It's just a convention. And so for me, there is a very clear narrator in this who is controlling the story. And I love the way you've made that narrator concrete.
Well, I mean, I didn't do it. You did it.
Well, no, I did
The two
not.
of yous.
Yeah, I did not have your model in my head, and I love that model a lot because it seems to me to do exactly what I want.
Oh, good.
Which is, again, I think if you're too hot in a point of view, I don't know if you guys.
What do you mean by hot?
Thank you. I don't know if you've talked about this. The way I talk about hot and cold point of views, this is what 30 years of teaching does. You have to explain all the stuff that you don't know you know, is usually by using film examples. So imagine you're in a very tight camera like almost Blair Witch. You know, the camera's riding literally on the character's shoulder, and you kind of get a glimpse of their feet, so you know that it's a woman in business shoes, you know, maybe walking down a sidewalk on a sunny day, and then all of a sudden you fall towards the sidewalk, and you whip the camera around, and you can see somebody running away with a purse, and it's all very intense. It's very hot, very emotional. Mm-hmm. But you don't have much information. Mm-hmm. Now you set the camera on a tripod across the street, and we see her walking, and we see someone walking up behind her, and we're going, look, 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 look. And then he grabs her purse and knocks her down, and we see her. That's a cold point of view. So too hot a point of view, I think, can make us throw our guards up sometimes. Interesting. My first thought in a really hot point of view with Amelia is, I'm nothing like that. So pulling the narrator back a bit can sometimes actually allow you to say, oh, I can make the empathetic and imaginative leap to be like you, even though this isn't anything that happened to me.
Right, and you end up kind of filling in some of the blanks with the you, because even though the specific you that Amelia's getting isn't exactly what you experienced,
right.
It connects to your own slightly different version of what's going on.
Right. Now, understand, I didn't think all this stuff out before I started writing.
Of course. Yeah.
And you started writing it in second person. You didn't do a draft in first or in
Yeah,
third.
I started in second person. I was trying to figure out how to get into the story. And sometimes doing something... I have a whole bunch of ways that I use just to get into a story. One of them is I come up with a technique, and another one is I take two ideas that aren't initially clearly connected and I smash them together. And, you know, so this is just a way sometimes if I'm really interested in something and I think I feel like a resonance with, second person would be really cool because I love it with Laurie Moore. I'll try it in this story. It's a really, really inefficient way to write because I can't tell you how many false starts I can end up with.
Yeah, I think we can. I think everyone here can sympathize with that. But let's go back to the footnotes thing because I think that's super interesting what AP brought up. So why footnotes? Did that come in your first draft? Was that something you always wanted to do?
Yep. The footnotes were basically what they are now in the first draft. Slightly different. The Elvish one was actually one ring to rule them all, one ring to bind them.
I
recognized.
And then the copy editor said, you really can't do that. So now it's the course listing. So David Foster Wallace liked to use footnotes to try to remind people they were reading, which seems to me to be a really weird thing to want to remind the reader. I'll tell you my first reason for using footnotes, and my basic reason for using footnotes is because I think they're cool and I really like to read them. And I thought, okay, I don't know how this story's going to go. I'll just throw everything at it I possibly can. And so I just put in footnotes.
That's a good enough reason anyway.
And the editors didn't come back and say, what's up with these footnotes? Did they give you notes on that?
No, not at all. But the other reason for it is because I think the reason that it worked, and that I'm now going to claim credit for, even though I don't have it, is because that creates a controlling narrator who obviously has something of a sense of humor, I think, which Amelia's in the middle of all this stuff. And, she doesn't realize how funny it is when the girl says, I'm Jewish and I can't get a tattoo. And they say, oh, yes, we'll give you a bracelet that will make it that way. And we'll just bill you through the bookstore.
A very believable amount of money.
Well, I do teach at a university. So I think that the footnotes give you a slight sense. Like I say, the narrator of a story is an important, super important character who has character who we don't consciously register. And I wanted to create the character of that narrator.
Right. Because I think that's what it did for me is that plus the second address made me really think about the narrator in a way that I don't normally.
It almost forces you to put that front and center and think about these questions as AP did. And so you're almost like pushing us in that direction, like
Yeah.
making us do it.
Oh, wow. That doesn't sound good.
No.
No,
I think
no.
Great way.
Yeah, no, it's a
Yeah.
very interesting tension because, like you said, there is this. It's or a structure maybe is the better word because there's suddenly this form on top of it where you're like, who are these footnotes for? Like I had the same question, like who, like, and then yeah, I mean, it was neat. It was a neat thing to suddenly realize because you really don't see it very often.
Right.
And the footnotes, especially because I mean, there weren't that many of them,
No.
Right.
and I couldn't figure out what the pattern was on it, which is why I came up with like the wild ideas about who it was for. Because I'm like, wait, so this one isn't for Amelia, and this one's explaining like Jewish history, and this one's in Elvish, and like, so what's the how do these tie together?
And none of them are for Amelia, I don't think. And it's interesting because you go into kind of neurology and neuropsychology by the end.
that
I
one.
really want to talk about that.
Yeah. Can we talk about that?
Why don't you read it?
Can
and
we
then-
read it? Let me just.
Yeah.
I have
Sure.
This,
Yeah.
I've been wanting to talk about this for 2 weeks now. So this is the footnote we're talking about. People often move before their brain tells them to. Benjamin Lieber's experiments showed that the intention to flex a finger muscle arose about 200 milliseconds before people moved it. But the actual movement of the finger started about 500 milliseconds before people moved the muscle. That is, we move first and then tell ourselves a tiny story to explain it.
Yeah.
That's a big thing to drop in the middle of a short
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And it begs a question for me is immediately when I read that, and then it really resonated when I got to the end of the story.
Yes.
Right.
Does Amelia have free will at all? In other words, is she at the mercy of the Fae, regardless of what her intentions are? And like,
Yeah.
it really was. It's been buzzing around in my brain for a while since we read.
And I think
Yeah.
the build up to that particular footnote was great because your footnotes before that were kind of small and casual, and then it's just boom,
Right,
it's
heavy
kind of
science.
like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
There are that and the footnote on glamour are the only ones that actually interact with the story in a way that
Yeah.
informs the reader in a meaningful way. First of all, I'm just really interested in that question right now.
It's fascinating,
Yeah.
regardless. Yeah.
I have a story coming out in fall of 2020, which is about reality and
Interesting.
yeah. But in this story, I was talking about dramatic tension early, you know, as a that was the other thing I'm just obsessed with right now. I was one of those people who wrote stories in which closely observed characters didn't do anything for a long time.
I mean, that's like every starting writer, I feel like we go through that.
Actually-
we talk about that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when I teach graduate students, it's all nuance and navel gazing, and when I teach freshmen, it's all supercharged plots with no characters. Not 100%. There's always some, but yeah. So dramatic tension. Teaching screenwriting has been really valuable for me because one of the things I learned is that suspense is better than surprise. Knowing something might happen is way more meaningful than, you know, you're going along,
Right, right.
surprise. And at that point, you're bored. You've already put the story down. And I love procedural television in a funny way.
So does Chelsea.
I do. It's
I
true.
do.
Chelsea a lot.
Here we go.
But anyway, yeah.
House. So when
yeah.
you're watching
Yeah.
House, I mean, how procedural is House? If it's on television and I walk through the living room and Hugh Laurie is sitting in a chair tossing a ball up and we are in a shot looking down on him and he grabs the ball and he gets up and he limps off, I think, it must be between 20 minutes and 15 minutes of the hour.
Yep.
I know how that story's going to turn out.
Right.
I just don't know the details of how it's
Right.
going to turn out. And there's a satisfaction in that. And so this story starts with, don't go under the hill.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you know that's what's going to happen.
Or you think the whole dramatic tension is, will she or won't she?
Right.
And you could complain that the problem with this story is that if you're a certain kind of reader, that structure really resonates with you. You know from the very beginning, yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah. That's
But it's how we get there that we're interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd never written a story like that before, and I liked it. And that thing about, we act, and then we tell ourselves a story about how we act. I don't know that the Fae had any control over Amelia,
Right.
but yeah, in a weird sense, I don't think Amelia has any real control over
Yeah,
Amelia
it's like
either.
Amelia's story has control over Amelia.
And I don't think any of us have control over ourselves. I think that we are all kind of fooled about how much of our actions are this kind of pachinko game result of our neurons firing in random combinations with each other.
Chemicals and,
That we think,
absolutely.
oh, yeah, that was my decision altogether. No, it wasn't at all.
So free will is an illusion.
I personally think that, but it makes my therapist really unhappy about it.
There's a lot of compelling evidence for
Yeah.
that conclusion. So, anyways, now we're contemplating our entire existence
Yeah,
in the course
exactly.
of these
Yeah.
eight,
And it-
10 pages or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Based on the college experiences, that's when I think we think we're in the most control. Like, oh, I'm finally free from my
Right, this is
parents,
my
and I'm
big
going to
chance.
rename
Yeah.
myself, and I'm going to lose all
Yeah,
this
this is
weight.
my big
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my big chance, and I'm free. No, you're not.
And yet you are. I mean, it's as close to freedom as we come. And since there's lots and lots of evidence that, like, this conversation is changing the arrangement of those pachinko stops in our brains, the talking to each other and looking for things and all that sort of thing, it just keeps getting more and more chaotic and more complicated. So, yeah, you are changing a whole lot. And I don't know. It's just a fascinating question to me. So I actually think that for me, this was a really dramatic tension. More than footnotes and more than second person turned out to be the issue of technique that brought this story from, oh, I'll just throw a whole bunch of things against the wall and see if they stick, to, oh, I have a story. And I will tell you, when I was writing it, I was thinking she'd go under the hill. And then about 2/3 of the way through, I thought, maybe she won't.
It's fun when stories surprise you a little like that.
Yeah, but it's because I think she kind of comes into herself at that point. And I think I know the point at which you're speaking about. And I'm like, oh, she's kind of got it all together, and she's like living life on her own terms. But then fate or the story or whatever it is comes in.
Michael Kidman or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Michael Goodman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a great false hope, or a false, not false ending. What we called it something in one
False win.
False win.
Yeah.
Exactly. Where you're like, oh, she's going to get out. She's going to escape. Oh, great. She's going to get on. Oh, no.
I think without that, the story would fail.
Yeah. You have to give it some twist. You have to give it
Yeah.
some turn. Yeah, I agree.
Ending should be inevitable but slightly surprising.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way
I
to
like
put
that.
it.
And I like that it's ambiguous as to whether or not it's a sad ending or a happy ending, or maybe it's both.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like you kind of, because you drop in the beginning when they're at the orientation that there are these people, and they're on the PowerPoints like, if you see these people, please let us know. There's bring them back to the student center or whatever. And the earliest one is from like the 30s.
Right. The black and white photos.
Yeah,
Right.
and so and it's unclear whether or not this person would have aged, and because they're showing the old, the picture from the 30s, no, he hasn't aged.
But it's a classic, show the gun in the first act kind of thing. That's how I read it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Where it was, oh, okay, she's going to get taken, right? Somebody's going to get taken. You just know. Someone's going to disappear.
And also, it's based on all of the stories of the person who's abducted, Tam Lin, and all the rest of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Rip Van Winkle is an American version of one of these stories brought over. The form of Rip Van Winkle is a classic folk tale around the Fae. So, you go to sleep and you wake up and it's 100 years later.
Right.
So that was our discussion of Maureen McHugh's story, Under the Hill. It is out in the September-October issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, edited by the incomparable Charlie Finley, who is wonderful. And he has excellent taste in stories.
Clearly.
Except for mine.
No. He's
Jane.
right.
And now we want to, we've come up with some fun questions for you, Maureen.
We think they're fun. Anyway.
You might
Five
not.
questions.
Okay, so my question for you, Maureen, is this. What is the best piece of writing advice you have ever received?
Oh,
No pressure.
no pressure. And I've received a ton of writing advice. But
That's
of
what I
course,
figured.
The hardest thing to learn to do as a writer is to write without having a deadline and anybody making you do it. So the best piece of it, I don't write every day. I don't write 5 days a week, but I am always pressuring myself. When was the last time I wrote? And what I've really come to is Virginia Woolf wrote 2 handwritten pages a day. So 250 words a day. At the end of the year, you've got a novel. So just sit down and write. It doesn't have to be good. You can't fix it if you haven't written it. That's the best advice I ever got.
Well, and you just said you don't write every day, which is really refreshing to hear, because I feel like everything I read is like, write every day, a writer writes.
There's definitely, I think, especially in the genre sort of world, there's this emphasis on word counts and that sort of thing, which I don't know.
But I do hear, Maureen, what you're saying, where it's got to be kind of front of mind, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where I like to live.
Yes.
Okay.
He lives on the edge of his own mind.
When I was just first starting out, my roommate in New York was a fine arts painter, and all she ever did was complain about. She was 10 years older than I was, and all she ever did was complain about how little time she had to work. And it instilled in me, I think it's really good if you're a writer, if you have a sense of guilt about not having written.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So what's the worst piece of writing advice you've ever received?
Write what you know.
That was easy.
That's good.
Yeah.
Because I've never met an elf in my life.
Yeah.
I think I write best when I write to find out things. Joan Didion has a quote, which I will get wrong. I write to find out what I think and what I feel. And she's got like 4 different things that she writes to find out. Writing is a process for me. I don't know what the story is when I start. I don't think most of us do. And so if there's something that itches at me, I'm not saying write to find out how Congress works.
Or maybe.
That book's been written, right?
Yeah. But I am saying write to figure out things that are tremendously important to me. But I don't really write to get the answers. I just write to explore them.
It's almost write what you don't know.
Write what you're obsessed with. Yeah.
What's your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
Yay.
Who is a writer you'd want to invite to a dinner party, living or dead?
Oh, interesting. I don't think writers necessarily make good company.
It depends
Thanks
on the writer.
a lot, Maureen. Hey.
It's a good chance they'll be drinking, though, right?
I've done some time in science fiction conventions, and the saying is, when fans come over, you lock the pantry. When writers come over, you lock the liquor bar. I guess I'd have to say, I know it's a stupid cliche answer, but I'd have to say Shakespeare. I think Will would be really fun to sit and talk to. I mean, he had the theater experience and all the rest of that stuff.
He'd probably be a lively guest.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah,
he'd probably
yeah,
be
yeah.
lively.
Lovely
Fun
guest.
time.
Yeah.
He would have so much gossip about the theater.
Yes.
500 years ago.
So-
Yeah, exactly.
Hey.
I like that stuff. I guess David Foster Wallace was also really famous for being a great listener.
Interesting.
Is there a story that you wish you had written?
Oh, God. I talked to there's a billion stories I wish I'd written, but Laurie Moore has a story I think is really beautiful called People Like That Are the Only People Here.
I think I have that in a collection. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
really good
it was
story,
in a year's best. I don't want to have written it for the reasons she wrote it. Her toddler had Wilms tumor, a kind of cancer. And her husband, in the story, she says, her husband turns to her and says, "You have to write about this. We're going to need the money."
Jesus.
Wow.
But Laurie Moore is really good at these funny distancing that actually brings you in. And the characters are mother, father, and baby. And yet it's the most personal story ever. It's just a masterfully handled story.
It's brutal read in
Brutal
a really
read.
good way. But yeah.
I also wish I'd written We Are
Oh my
All
gosh.
Completely Beside Ourselves,
Yes.
Karen Fowler. Karen is a friend of mine, and God, I hate how good she
I
is.
know.
But we're friends anyway.
That's how we talk about Carter sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was 5 questions.
Yeah.
Questions.
Well, thank you guys. This is, I got to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Isn't this the best?
And you get to talk about yourself some more, because if you have things coming out that we should
Yeah,
be on
yes,
the
what's
lookout
coming up?
for.
I think it's in the next 6 months to a year. Tor is reissuing my first novel, China Mountain Jong.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
Nice.
And I was given the chance to read it again, and is there anything that you need to fix or anything like that? And I said, I wrote it in came out in 1992.
Long pause.
Yeah. So I said, no, it is what it is. But I was so much braver then.
Interesting.
Wow.
How so? Expand on that a little bit. What do you mean braver? In what you tackled the subject matter, or
Just the way I wrote. I didn't have near as much technique as I have now. But when I wrote that novel, I never thought anybody would read it. I finished that. I lived in China for a year. I started the novel before I went to China when I was living in New York for a writer's group that met like yours does once a week. And I thought it was going to be a short story. And then when I went to China, I was not all the way done. When I came back, I finished it, writing it in my mother's unfinished basement. And I mean, it was about a gay Chinese American guy in the future. And I was a white girl from Ohio. And I just, nothing about it. And there was nothing else like it out there. And I had this weird theoretical idea I was using. And everything about it was a non-starter. And I really thought nothing would ever happen with it. And it's never gone out of print.
that's so fascinating.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
young writers and young artists, they don't know what they're risking. Really, they don't.
Yeah.
they don't
They just
know.
go for it.
They're not no. They don't know what they're.
They don't know what to be afraid of.
Yeah, they don't know what to be afraid of. Yeah.
And you have a story coming out in Tor also next fall.
I do. I have a story coming out in 2020 at Tor.com called Yellow and the Perception of Reality. And it's connected to that footnote that you liked so much.
Can't wait.
Yeah, Chris is
I
going to
can't
be
wait.
first in line for that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right up my alley.
Sign up for their email updates. They're really
I'm
good.
already on those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I get
Yeah,
them.
those are great. Oh, well, congratulations. And
Yeah,
well
thank
done.
you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
This
Thank
was
you,
really,
guys.
really fun.
Thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Maureen, where can people find you on the social medias?
I've just recently sort of started doing my Instagram account for real. And on Instagram, I'm Maureen MCQ, all one word. It's also my Twitter handle, and I'm on Facebook under Maureen McHugh.
All right. So that was the episode. This has been the Genre Hustle.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Genre Hustle. You can find us on our website, www.genrehustle.com, on Twitter at Genre Hustle, or on Instagram at Genre Hustle. Our podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including YouTube. Be sure to like, subscribe, and send any feedback or suggestions our way. See you next time.